Here we go! Here we go! Here we go!
We're gonna have a fiery Sterling today.
Well, no, you just have a big old air horn, and anytime a Packers fan tries to talk, you just hit the button and drown them out. Like, no, I can't hear you. Go Bears.
It's basically the la 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 la.
Yeah, exactly. Right? You don't even have to live there. You can do it from here. Just remote control everything. Yeah, I'm pissed off, man. Fuck the NFL at this point.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the 1IQ Football Talk podcast, and we are officially in Pro Bowl week, so it is just the most exciting time in football, and this is the first time that we actually haven't had a proper football game played since the start of August. But first off, Sterling, my friend, how you doing?
Doing all right. I mean, Saturday, like you said, it's a little depressing the first week without any football because, like, the Pro Bowl doesn't count anymore. Right? Like, even back when they actually played football for the Pro Bowl, it didn't really count. But now it's flag football. It's little drills and games. It's fun for the kids to watch.
Yeah.
Basically.
Like, I watched the skills competition this year, and like, I understand some of the skills competition stuff. Like, I think some of the things that they do are fairly interesting. I think, like, the relay race with the catches, where it was you have a wide receiver, a corner, and then a tight end doing, like, basically the relay was you have to catch 3 one-handed passes. You have to wear, like, mascot gloves and try to catch a pass, and you have to make, like, a diving catch. And I was like, that's fairly interesting. It's not super exciting, but, like, it's something. I just wish we could go back to the days when there was Pro Bowl stuff where it was like, oh, hey, we're going to have a quarterback competition of where we're seeing them who can throw the farthest pass or who can throw the fastest type of pass, and, like, have all of the quarterbacks kind of be paired up against each other. You can have the big men do a bench press competition. You can have the fast guys do a 40-yard dash competition, that type of stuff. And, like, I just kind of sit back and go, like, I kind of miss some of those competitions.
Yeah, a little bit, but even then, like, I don't really care how far Drake May can throw the football. Like, and
Yeah.
that's it too. Like, so many guys have started to opt out of the Pro Bowl that you've got guys that are being named to a Pro Bowl team and they were on a 3-win football team and they didn't do anything impressive all year. Like, it's just a filler week is all it is, which I get. They got to find something to keep people interested in football. So by all means, it's not something I'm going to spend my time watching.
Yeah, like, for me, it was one of those things, have it on in the background type stuff while I'm doing other stuff. But you brought up Drake May, and that is another conversation that I kind of wanted to have with this in regards for the Pro Bowl, because I know when we talk a lot about player success, oftentimes when we talk about a player, let's say 7-8 years into their career, it's like, oh, well, he's made it to a Pro Bowl this many times and he's been an All-Pro this many times. And I think there should be a very big difference between being named to the Pro Bowl and being a Pro Bowl substitute, because, again, Drake May making it to the Pro Bowl, you're sitting back going like, oh, wow, he made it to the Pro Bowl and he did what exactly? Like, his numbers were fine for a rookie quarterback that played less than a full season's worth. Like, they weren't special by any means. And then you also look at Russell Wilson, who came in, you're like, his numbers were fine, but by no means were they Pro Bowl level numbers. And I just kind of sit back and I go, man, like, there needs to be a very different category, because I think if you are named to the Pro Bowl the initial time and you don't actually participate in the Pro Bowl, the guy that's being put in your place, he shouldn't have the accolade of making a Pro Bowl, because he was an alternate. Like I look at Trubisky, Mitchell Trubisky. He has made a Pro Bowl. He was a Pro Bowl alternate. And I look at that and I go, man, like he should have never made the Pro Bowl. The only reason he was there is because two guys backed out and he was the second choice to kind of get there for the NFC. And you look at Drake May and Russell Wilson, you're like, wow, you guys made it to a Pro Bowl because Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson said, nah, fam, I'm good.
Well, exactly. And I mean, that's it used to be that, Pro Bowl selections, that would play a part in your future contracts and stuff. It's like, oh, this has an X number of Pro Bowl selected players, so he's going to garner a higher contract coming up. But I mean, now you look at it and you go, it really is like a participation trophy. Like, I think that needs to be taken out of it. Like we discussed a couple weeks ago about how 1,000-yard rushers really isn't as impressive as it was 20 years ago because there's more games played, and it's just it just doesn't have that same impact as it once did to get 1,000 yards. And now you make the Pro Bowl, it's a big whoop. It doesn't really matter anymore. It's just, I don't know, man. It just they tried to rebrand it and rejuvenate it and find it a way to make it more interesting for people, and I think they missed the mark. Maybe just sticking to a straight up flag football game would be the better way to go about it, because then at least you're still sort of promoting that flag football that's coming up, and just do straight up flag football game instead of all these little mini games and competitions throughout as well.
Yeah. I remember in like 2012 or something like that. They were in Hawaii and they did a system where it was like, okay, you have former Hall of Famers. Like for instance, you had Deion Sanders versus Jerry Rice, and they got to actually like draft their team out of all the Pro Bowlers. I was like, that was pretty interesting. Like it made something where it wasn't necessarily NFC versus AFC. You could have just a fun mixture of players. That was something that I enjoyed, and I was kind of sad that they took away because it was interesting to see who would be ultimately picked, and like, oh, this guy was picked over this and that. But you and I have been talking about the Pro Bowl situation for years and years, and just going, it's boring. It's tough to watch. Like, sure, the skill competition is semi-entertaining if you're part of a younger audience, or you just want something on in the background that isn't the silence of death. But like it's just one of those things where the game is flag football, and that's great because I think flag football should be represented a little bit more, especially with it being an Olympic sport. But at the same time, I'm like, am I gonna watch that flag football game? I'm gonna have it on in the background,
right?
But yeah,
and it I don't know. They got to figure out a way to do it, and having it at the end of the season the way they do, I think it affects it, because I mean, effectively, this is the NFL All-Star game. We talk about the other leagues, NHL, NBA, MLB. They have their All-Star games, All-Star weekends as well. They all do theirs in the middle of the season, though, and in some cases, that game actually matters for what happens later in the season, come playoffs and stuff. And so maybe that's something the league needs to look at moving it to a different time and finding another way to do it, because it's a lackluster event at this point. And maybe have it after the season's all well and like over, and have something attached to it where it's like, okay, these are the Pro Bowlers from the AFC and NFC. We're playing this game on draft weekend or something like that. It's a flag football game, but hey, whoever wins, you guys get home field advantage for the Super Bowl. And so you get to choose what the jerseys are that you wear for the Super Bowl, the AFC or the NFC team, whichever's there. Do something like that to just make it have some semblance of importance.
Yeah.
Like there's something you're playing for. Because I know a lot of guys, they opt out of it because football's a physical game. Even when they're doing flag football, we've seen many times where, because you're so instinctive at tackling, you forget you're playing flag football, and we've seen guys throw hits and nobody's wearing pads, and you're like, ooh, okay, see, this is why guys opt out, because you get hurt during a Pro Bowl, and all of a sudden you miss the entire next season because you blew out an ACL or something. Like, nobody wants that.
Yeah, I I've heard an idea floated by people that says like, "Oh, we will never want a draft lottery system in the NFL." And I agree. If the NFL ever
No,
goes
I
to a
don't.
draft lottery system, I will I think the collective for the NFL fans should rage because the draft lottery system is a stupid system. I hate it in every single league. It makes
Yeah.
no sense. Worst team should get the best player. I don't care if you tank or whatever. All you're doing is wasting a season if you're tanking. That's on you and not that. I could go on a much different rant
Mhm.
about that, but I've heard an idea of maybe for the Pro Bowl week, you could have the two worst teams play each other to see who can get the rights for the first overall pick. And
Yeah.
when I first heard that, I was like, oh, that seems like a great idea because, they're both bad enough that they're going to be 1 and 2. So it's probably going to be fairly even because they're both bad teams. It actually has some implications to it. But then I was sitting back thinking to myself, I'm like, well, let's just take for this year's example, you have the Browns and you have the Titans.
Mhm.
Both of them retained their head coach this year. But in years past, we've seen teams that have the first and second overall pick not retain their coach. So my question would be for that is if a team knows they have the first or second pick and they want to fire their head coach, well, like what's that system going to be? Is it basically just going to be player run, or when you hire like let's say for instance the Titans fired their head coach this year, and let's just say they hired Bobby Slowick to be their new head
Mhm.
coach after the Texans lost to the playoffs, and they getting all the preparations done and they come in, like are they going to try to establish a new system? Like what the hell would that type of stuff be? And it and you might be a team that goes, "Oh, we really want that number 1 pick. So we want to fire our head coach, but we don't want to mess with the system." Like for me when I first heard that, I was like this sounds like a great idea, but the deeper that I kind of thought about it, it's like the more issues actually come up with that. And I've heard other people talk about, oh, maybe you get the bottom 4 teams all in like a mini playoff type scenario of where it's like, oh, you played this week and then for the Pro Bowl week you have the 2 finalists of those. I'm like, I like, again, you just have so many problems with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's no real solution, I don't think, unfortunately.
it's yeah, and luckily this week, however, I will say if you are a college football fan, you do have a plethora of games that you can watch. Again, we had the East West Shrine Bowl on Thursday. We had
Mhm.
the HBCU Bowl yesterday, and now we have the Senior Bowl today. That's going to be kicking off here in about 20 minutes. So you have like really good competitive football because again, these games are not as intense as you would see for instance in college football games, but they're still playing for instance for draft stock. Like there's guys that went to the Senior Bowl this week that have gone from being a mid second round pick to now being a late first round pick, and these are important weekends. So like there is football to be played and there is entertaining football, but it's just not going to be on a Sunday.
No, exactly. And like other ideas I've seen floated is, what if, because of the college football playoff being expanded the way it has been, if they try to save that national championship game for the Sunday between AFC, like the championship weekend and Super Bowl, and so then you play the that championship on this Sunday, and then you move like the Pro Bowl, but you replace like the Hall of Fame game with a Pro Bowl game, and you move it earlier. You move it 3 or 4 weeks earlier, so it's sort of at the start of training camp. All those veterans, all the guys who got to the
Pro Bowl, they're
um,
nice and
Pro
rested and
Bowl, they're
healed
going to
up.
be more inclined to play because it's like, okay, now this is almost like a warm up for us. We get to play with some of these guys before we start going head to head against them through the season. And I think that would be a more entertaining, competitive way to do it as well, because you're seeing all the best players from last year play in the first game of the year, so you can see everything instead of it often being two teams that were either middle of the pack or lower down. You don't often see like the best teams playing in the Hall of Fame game.
Yeah, it's basically just the two teams that had a Hall of Fame player go in that makes a
Exactly.
large impact. Like last year, it was for the Texans,
Yep.
they had Andre Johnson go to the Hall of Fame, and for the Bears, you had three guys that went to the Hall of Fame: Devin Hester, Steve McMichael, and Julius Peppers. I don't consider Julius Peppers a Chicago Bears Hall of Famer, but he
Mhm.
played for the Bears, so he's technically a Chicago Bears Hall of Famer. But
Yeah, but I mean that could also then play into, that format that you were saying you like, because then you take those Hall of Famers and you go, okay, well there's 8 of you, so we're going to put 4 on one side, 4 on the other. You guys are going to effectively coach these teams, draft these teams from the Pro Bowl selections that you've got. If some of them are young enough, maybe you go, okay, well you can even play in this game if you want to as a Hall of Famer. That's Hall of Fame game, because sometimes you will get first ballot Hall of Famers that are still NFL ready. They could still play the game. And it's not like that game is full speed, full contact anyway. So that could be an entertaining way to do things also. They don't have to play the whole game. Maybe, it'd be fun to see a guy like Jerry Rice, that like not anymore obviously, but back when it was his year, have him out there for a couple snaps running down the field to catch the ball.
it
Would have
would
been
have been
entertaining to see,
entertaining as hell to see Devin Hester in this new kickoff rule. Like
right?
just like I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just worry that if we were to for instance like move the Pro Bowl to like the beginning of the year, like the Hall of Fame game, like let's say it's the start of training camps where you have these Pro Bowlers all go. I think the
Mhm.
owners would be really worried, for instance, like, oh, what happens if my star wide receiver tears his ACL because he made a cut a little bit too aggressively because he hasn't been in training camp and he hasn't had that warm up period, and now he's out for the year. And I just know the owners would be in a absolute like fury, just like this, like we would see,
Oh,
we would see one injury a year where to a star player would be like, oh, like that guy's gone. It's kind of like what we did when we were talking about the preseason for years, where it was like, man, how many times are we talking about seeing a star player go
mhm.
down for the year because his coach decided to play him in a meaningless game?
Well, I mean, that was the point I was actually just going to make is we see it anyway. So yeah, the owners are going to be all upset about it, but I mean, that same player when he went to training camp was going to make a cut and blow out his ACL anyway because he didn't stay in shape in the offseason. So that's sort of where I look at it is it's like we see those same injuries during training camp, in the Hall of Fame game, during preseason anyway. And so if it's going to happen, it's going to happen anyway. And so I would rather have it happen during a Pro Bowl game where we're seeing the best players out there. It's going to be unfortunate because I never want to see it happen, than a Hall of Fame game where I don't care anyway.
Yeah,
And then uh, like there's no perfect solution for it.
there
Like
really isn't.
nobody wants to play in the pro game because this sport is too physical. You see the all-star games for these other sports, like even NHL, they can still play the entire game without throwing hits, and you can still play competitive, entertaining hockey that way. You just don't throw the big crunching hits. In football, you can't do that because you have to hit a guy to stop the play from happening. And so that's where the issue is in the NFL. Like even Major League Baseball and basketball, both of those are non-contact sports. And so you can play your all-star games without somebody getting hurt. Even there though, we see guys get injured because it's still a sport. You're still using all of your muscles, your tendons, your ligaments, and sometimes you step wrong, you land wrong, you swing the bat wrong, whatever sport it is, and something pops or tears. It happens. That is life. And so that's where, it's that fine line of how much are we going to cater to these multi-billionaire owners because their slave might get hurt before the season starts.
Yeah, I honestly, when it comes to the other leagues, Pro Bowls or All Star games, like here's the thing: is like I think almost every fan of their sport can say their All Star games suck because
Hmm.
even with the NHL, for instance, they do 3-on-3, and then they only do like a 10-minute game, and then it's like, oh, we're bringing, like, oh, this is the Pacific versus the Central, and it's the Atlantic versus the Metro, and then, oh, those two teams play, and then whoever wins those games, they go up against the other team. Like, they do it kind of like that way. And the NBA All-Star game is horrible. Like, I even heard Obama talking about it with an NBA guy, where he's like, you guys play pickup basketball during the off season. You know how to play the game without it being physical. Do that for the All-Star game. And
Yep.
yeah, I'm just kind of at the point right now where, because we talked about it a little bit earlier in this, where the difference between being selected to the Pro Bowl and being a Pro Bowl alternate, they need to be different categories. You might as well just have it be a situation of where you don't even play a game at this point, because do we really need the flag football with this? And you don't see a Pro Bowl game in the Premier League. You don't see a Pro Bowl game or an All-Star game in MLS, for instance, like soccer. Like, it's one of those things. Do we really need the All-Star game? Like, in football? Yeah, money. And I
That's
know
all it comes down to.
and I know the NFL will never go away from it, but it's one of those things. It's like, man, like,
No, I agree.
The NFL should do a situation of where they put all of the resources into the college stuff, where it's like, listen, these guys, most of these guys that are on this Senior Bowl roster are coming to our league. So we are going to be able to jazz it up like we do for the Pro Bowl and put all the fancy lights and gizmos for all of this. And we're going to have this be the event before, because you're seeing the stars of today next week, but you're seeing the stars of tomorrow today.
100%. I would so much rather see the East-West Bowl be the Pro Bowl game for the NFL. It's the futures game, like anything like that. Or, as I said, just have it so the national championship is played during that Pro Bowl.
That is
weekend.
also another good
because
idea.
then you can do all your little gimmicky games and stuff with all the Pro Bowlers, and then on Sunday we get to watch real football again.
Yeah. You could even have it where the college players are mingling in some of those competitions with the NFLers and be like, oh, hey, we have this kid from Georgia, and he's going to go in a 40-yard dash against Tyreek Hill, for instance. Or we have these two offensive linemen who are going to do the bench press, and see, like, again, just kind of going back to some of these, or have like the quarterback skill competition where we see them hit targets, and it's like, oh, Joe Burrow's going up against Cam Ward. Like, that would be entertaining.
It would be entertaining, but that poses the same risk as we were talking about before. What if that Georgia player comes in to run that 40, pulls a hammy or tears something, and then all of a sudden he goes from, oh, I was going to be a top 10 draft pick, to now I'm a 5th rounder because I got hurt. That would still run a risk where instead of it being the owners, it would be the agents going, yeah, I don't think you should do this, because if you do hurt yourself, it's going to affect your draft stock, and so
yeah, well, in the skills competition
that's why
games,
I
we
think
don't see
having
players
something
get
like
hurt.
the East-West Bowl or the national championships itself be the game that is played between the conference championship and the Super Bowl, because then it is competitive football that's being played for a reason other than just these guys did really well this year but not well enough to be the best.
Yeah, like, I think you and I are in kind of lockstep here at the moment of where it should realistically be the national championship game. It gets played on the Sunday, and it has all the collection of NFL talent, and you can see the NFL guys there who are the Pro Bowls, and they can be on the sidelines and hang out, this, that, or the other thing. They don't have to go if they don't want to. They're still a Pro Bowler. And it actually doesn't take away the fact of, like, oh, you have a Pro Bowler here in Drake May. Was he selected to the Pro Bowl as an alternate?
Yeah.
So he wasn't selected to the fucking Pro Bowl then. Like, he is an alternate.
Right. Exactly. It would make more sense to me in that way. It's unfortunate that it's so soon after the college season ends, and they like to have that break before they do like the combine, because having like the combine this week would be phenomenal doing it that way and having full combine coverage. But again, it's too close to the end of the college season to be
Yeah.
doing something like that.
The only reason why I would dislike the combine being this week is because you would have a disadvantage for the teams playing in the Super Bowl. Because then, like, for instance, you have coaches who are focusing on game plans as opposed to. I like where the combine is, where it's a couple weeks after the season, because we get that little bit of breath of fresh air. It's like, okay, and the Super Bowl's over, and it's like just enough time after the season ends where it's like, oh, it's the combine this week. I can't wait for this. Finally getting some football stuff back. But
Yeah, I get that. I just would you really be that upset if the Kansas City Chiefs had a slight disadvantage in next year's draft? Like that's sort of how I look at it. It's like, okay, well, I mean, you're winning the championship this year.
Yep.
You're gonna have a teensy little disadvantage, and not really, because I mean, you can still send your GM to look at all the combine stuff
Totally.
because
No,
he's the one that's
and
going to be ultimately making that pick anyway, not your coach. Your coach can still focus on the game.
no,
So
I like I
that's sort
get
of
that, but it's one of those
yeah,
things you bring in the idea of like, oh, are you really feeling that bad for Kansas City? For instance, if this was the Steelers and the Bears in the Super Bowl, we'd be both be going like, oh man, this sucks. Like you saw how upset I was having Tom Brady commentate a game where Ben Johnson was still coaching and going like,
mhm.
this is a complete break of the rules essentially. I know he's not breaking any rules
No,
necessarily, but like it's one of those things where
and
we're talking about the Chiefs, but if it was our team, we'd probably be a little pissed off.
probably, but even at the same time, like all I'm saying is the combine would still be more interesting and a better selection than what we have for the Pro Bowl now.
Yeah,
That's ultimately all that is. And I don't think it should be this week. It just would be better than what we have as a Pro Bowl,
totally agree.
right?
I agree with that. But I think both of us are just kind of sitting here going, there are so many better things that could be done.
There are.
And I
Well,
like
and
the idea of the national championship though. I do.
yeah, no, I think that's the best one, and the East West Bowl being a close second behind that if they didn't want to do the national championship. But you mentioned an interesting part about, um, you know, disadvantage for coaches and being upset because a coach isn't going to necessarily be focused on the game because he's focusing on something else, and there's still discussions coming into play this week about that happening, and a lot of talks about maybe this tampering window needs to be moved back beyond the Super Bowl because I don't agree with this, but I know there's been a lot of unhappy Lions fans this week because there's been interviews with Ben Johnson and him talking about how, oh, well, when Dennis Allen got fired back in November, that was really when I started building my team, my coaching staff
Yeah.
for the job I was going to get. And people are starting to freak out going, well, if he was already focusing on it then why was he not? Maybe he wasn't fully focused when they were playing in the playoffs. I don't agree with that because let's be real, that offense still put up 31 points, and 31 points most of the time is going to be good enough to win a game. So that's not on Ben Johnson at all. I think he was
Jared Goff
focused on
throwing
that game,
3
and
interceptions.
that is the natural progression. Like you're not going to wait until you're finished your season and then go, okay, well, I got to get a job in 3 days and I need to build a team of coaches. Like
Yeah.
it's just
just
not
not gonna happen.
logical. But I've seen so many Lions fans freaking out on the internet about it this week where I'm like, guys, you got to pump the brakes. Like if you know you're getting a head coaching job next year and you see a guy get fired that you're like, that would be a really good fit for my D coordinator, I'm going to give him a call and see if he's interested. That is not tampering. That is not an issue. That is not a break of focus. That is just a guy being smart and doing his due diligence and planning for his future, which I can't fault him for. But there is a lot of talk about maybe the interview process, at least, needs to be pushed back because of the same thing. You've got, we talked about it last week at length, where there's a lot of teams that after Ben Johnson got hired, it was like a domino effect of panic hiring some of these coaches before all the available options were truly on the table. And then the Bills lost out, and all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe Joe Brady might have an opportunity somewhere. Oh, but wait, most of the jobs are gone now, and nobody wants to be the Saints coach.
Yeah, I look at it this way from the coaching standpoint. And what you're saying with the tampering, that is just a guy doing his due diligence. And Ben Johnson called Dennis Allen in December and said, hey, I'm going to be getting a head coaching job this year. These are where my agent has told me the likely landing spots for me. So if I go here, would you be willing to come here with me? That's just smart business. And
It is.
every single time that Ben Johnson was in a press conference and someone asked him about head coaching stuff when he was still with the Lions, he would always go, guys, like, I understand your question. I understand why you have to ask, but I'm not focusing on any of that here at the moment. I'm worried about what's happening this week. And again, you put up a great point. The Lions scored more than 30 points in that game.
Yep.
How often are most teams scoring 30 points in a game? Maybe a couple times a year. It's like the Lions did that basically every single week, guys. Like, let's pump the brakes. And Lions fans
if they
are
had put
really
up 6 points on the board that game, then I would
very,
definitely be
very
joining
different story.
that conversation.
Yeah, like for instance, if they put up let's say less than 20, I could sit back and go, okay, maybe. But even then, I do think the NFL has done a better job, particularly in this season, where they said to everyone, if they have a job, you are not allowed to in-person interview them. You're allowed to do a virtual interview for no longer than 3 hours. And you're only allowed to do that once. And once you have that interview, you can't talk with them again until they no longer are playing in the playoffs, which is a system I went, you know what? Yeah, I like that. And for the people that are sitting back going like, oh, well, the Bears kind of had this domino effect. And yes, they did. But it's not like, for instance, that the Raiders didn't have the same opportunity as the Bears. Same thing with the Jags. Same thing with the Saints. Same thing with the Jets. And the Bears were just ready for when Ben Johnson, because they didn't expect Ben Johnson to be eliminated that week. They thought he was going to be there for the Super Bowl. The Bears jumped on it. Yeah, exactly. The Bears jumped on top of it. Ben Johnson, like, he didn't even go in for an in-person interview. He told his agent, get the deal done with the Bears, because that's where he wanted to go from his 3-hour interview. And it's not like Todd Monken wasn't available during that time, because he was, or actually he got eliminated the week after, but it's still one of the, oh wait, no, he got eliminated that same week. So Todd Monken was available. You could have talked with Todd Monken if you were a team that was really, like, for instance, I look at the Raiders. You wanted Ben Johnson. Todd Monken, probably the second best offensive minded coach out there in this cycle. You lost out on Ben Johnson. Okay, well, guess what? You have the opportunity to fly Todd Monken out. Same thing with the Jags. Same thing with the Cowboys. And I actually think the hiring process right now for the coaches is actually good, as opposed to a year before when coaches were being asked to, on a Wednesday, fly out. Like let's say Ben Johnson's case, going out to, let's just say he flew out to LA to go interview for the Chargers job. He had to do that on a Wednesday while still preparing for a game. That was really shitty, because it's like, okay, at that point, he's now having to travel twice a week as opposed to actually building the game plan. But yeah, when it comes to the Lions, I feel bad for their fans, because this is the most successful this organization has probably ever been. Like, they've had 3 years now of where it's like, damn, this is a good team. Like last year, like 3 years ago, they started out really poor, and then they got better as the season went on. It was like, man, this Lions team, like, they're building something here. Like they're going to be a good team next year. And then last year, they were a really good team. We're like, damn, this team is going to be the best team in the NFC. And they were. Now, granted, they were so injured. If the Lions weren't injured as badly as they were on defense, we would be talking about them playing in the Super Bowl right now.
Oh, 100% we would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where Lions fans knew the entire year that both of their coordinators were going to go elsewhere for head coaching jobs. They were shocked that Ben Johnson was there this year, because he denied jobs. And I think Lions fans are upset at Ben Johnson because he chose a division rival. It's like, guys, he laid it out there in his press conference. He said, I have nothing but respect for the Lions organization, and it was a hard decision for me to leave. And the only reason I chose the Bears well, there's a handful of reasons why I chose the Bears, but one big reason was because this is the best division in football, and I want to be the best in the best division in football.
Yeah.
And so if I want to be the best, I have to beat the best, and all of these guys are here, giving nothing but glowing reviews, and they're basically just calling him a traitor and all this type of stuff. Like, when Vic Fangio got hired by the Broncos, it was a sad moment for me as a Bears fan because I knew we were losing probably the best defensive mind in all of football. But I was like, man, good for him for going out there and getting a head coaching job. Like, when Adam Gase got hired by the Dolphins away from the Bears, I looked at him and said he was the best offensive coordinator the Bears have had in my lifetime. Like, he had Jay Cutler in his 30s playing the best football that I have ever seen Jay Cutler play. And when he went to Miami, I was sad, but I was like, man, good for him for being able to get a head coaching job. And I'm just like looking at these Lions fans, they're just losing their mind.
I mean, I think a large part of it is because they know losing both coordinators, this team is going to take a step back next year. Like, I understand Dan Campbell is a great head coach, but the head coach doesn't often call the plays.
Yes.
You know, you'll see it sometimes, especially with the offensive-minded guys. But when you've got like a like that, he's not calling the plays, and so they're going to have to bring in an OC and a DC to be calling those plays, new playbook. You know, things are going to have to be relearned. This team is going to regress next year because of these two losses.
Yep.
And it's unfortunate because that shrinks their window for being able to win a Super Bowl. You know, because we look at it and we go, well, unless they, you know, hit perfect next year, it's likely not going to happen next year. So then it's going to have to be the year after that. And then you're looking at going, okay, well, now Jared Goff's getting a little older. These rookie deals are starting to come up. So now they really got to get it done because they're going to have to start spending the money on these players. And then I understand why they're frustrated. I just think they're going after the wrong issues. You know, they're making it about Ben Johnson when it's really just, it's about football. This is the game that we love. You know, this is the way it goes. Your team is really good. Other teams are going to want those coaches to make their team better.
Yep.
And so now you have to find a guy to replace that. That's why guys like Kyle Shanahan and Andy Reid are so successful, because they're very good at teaching and grooming the guys underneath them to be great coaches. So when they lose somebody to another team, they go, okay, great. Now it's your turn. I'm going to teach you everything that I taught him, and you're going to be the next great that comes up and does it.
Yeah, and you often see those guys be very good coaches as well. And that's what you want. If you're a head coach, you want your guys that are underneath you to go somewhere else to be successful, because it shows that that you are good enough to keep your job, but also developing guys that other people want. And when it comes to, for instance, like Ben Johnson, I always say this. Going to you, if knowing the company that you worked for, there was a competitor that was offering you a promotion, but B, also a higher paying salary. When we were still working together at that same company, if you said to me, hey, Brendan, I'm moving to so-and-so because they're offering me this promotion with this amount of money, I'd be like, man, I hate the fact that I'm not working with you anymore, but I get it. Like, I always go, like, if I was in the same position, I would be for me, my play-by-play career, the team that I'm working for right now, if another team, let's say in the same division, called me and said, hey, we're going to offer you more money to do what you were doing, I would, it would be a discussion, and it would be something where I would probably do it. The same with most of us. Like, you're getting a promotion and you're getting more money, you're going to go no matter what, even if it is a competitor. Now,
yeah, and I don't think the Lions fans are that mad that he left. Like you said, they knew he was going.
Yeah.
They knew he was good enough, he was going to get a job. I think they're trying to find a way to make his life a little more difficult. You know, find a way to be like, oh yeah, the Bears tampered, so take away their, one of their draft picks or something. That's sort of what they're wanting. but I don't think they're necessarily thinking about it in that way. I think it's just that knee-jerk reaction, that passion for your team, going, well, my team got worse because you went to that team, and that's a rival, so fuck you.
Yeah.
We want you to suffer because of it. And that's ultimately all it is.
The last thing that I will say to Lions fans is we saw an example of this a few years ago with the Philadelphia Eagles after they went to a Super Bowl. They had both their offensive coordinator and their defensive coordinator taken. Last year, the Eagles, both the coordinators that they moved up into those roles didn't work out. And they went out and got new coordinators this year. And guess what? The Eagles are back in the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
I always say this with the CEO style head coaches. You are playing a risky game with the coordinator hires. But if you have a good team and you are a good coach, if you can get just 1 year of just going like, okay, I'm going to bring in Vic Fangio this year. I know Vic Fangio is not going to get a head coaching job elsewhere because he's done that and he's been down that road. And I think everyone knows that he's just a defensive coordinator in this league. You can get the job done. And it's one of those things where I look at the Steelers and go, like, if they just made the right offensive coordinator hire, like, that we would be talking about the Steelers in a much different conversation. Like, with Matt Canada, after his first year, both of us were saying they need to fire Matt Canada because he couldn't do anything. And they just kept him around. And now they have Arthur Smith, who they're not going to move on from. And it's likely going to cause them losing Justin Fields in the offseason unless they give him a big-time contract. Excuse me. But it's like Lions fans I don't think should necessarily worry as much. Yeah, they might be taking a big step back next year because they're losing 2 head coaching coordinators. But if Dan Campbell is really this brilliant head coach, he will be able to get it working.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, that's just it. It's just going to take a little bit of time. Like you said, the Eagles weren't able to get it done right away that next year. It took a year to figure it out. And, you know, we could see that with the Bears still. Like Ben Johnson there, you know, if it doesn't work out with Dennis Allen, maybe that defense takes a step back and they struggle there, you know. And Pittsburgh, that really is it. If they had found the right offensive coordinator at some point, I think we wouldn't be talking about this team going 8 years in a row losing the first round of the playoffs. It's just they don't seem to be able to find that offensive coordinator that can score points. You know, like last year, if they had got Cliff Kingsbury instead of Arthur Smith, I think we'd be talking about the Steelers having played in the AFC Championship last week.
I agree. I
You know,
agree.
and that's what it is. Sometimes it's just the right hire at the right time, and that's why it's such a competitive league, because it's hard to get those guys, because when they're that good, you've got 5, 6, 7 teams all vying for their services, and they can choose where they want to go because of that.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting to see what all happens for the remaining part of this year, because again, we still have the Saints job, and it sounds like at this moment the Saints are ready to hire Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator for the Eagles. It's basically been said at this point, like, if he was available he would be hired, but he's not available at this moment, so they have to wait till February 10th to hire him, and even then they're still going to bring him in for an interview. So the Saints might not even have a head coach until like February 12th type situation. And
which is fine, because it's not like they're competing with any other teams for head coaching positions.
Exactly.
You know, and so they can afford to wait on something like that.
Yeah, that isn't going to be too much of an issue. I think that, like, if it was one of those situations where it was 2 teams fighting for him, and it's also the Saints who, let's be honest here, the Saints, if it wasn't for the Jets and the Jags in this hiring cycle, the Saints would be talked about in a much worse light, because the Jets, well, they're the Jets, and the Jags of what they've done this offseason has just been a masterclass in dumb fuckery and just pure stupidity of just what they did. Firing their coach, which we all knew Doug Peterson was gone. We expected them to fire their GM. They're like, no, we're actually going to keep him because we think people are going to want to work with him. And then Their top
Mhm.
quote choice is like, I never considered you, especially with that guy. And then their second choice was like, I don't really want to work with this guy, so I'm gonna go back to Tampa Bay. And they're like, oh wait, no, we fired him. So now you have to look for a new GM throughout this process, and you're delaying even more. But the Saints have just been kind of sitting there going, no one is talking about how much of a mess we are. We don't have a quarterback. We're $77 million over the cap. We basically need new starters at every single position on our team. No one's talking about us yet.
I mean, if you're a coach GM that wants to build a team from the ground up, then the
That's a
Saints is the
team.
perfect place because you're going to have to go in there. You're going to have to release $77 million worth of players. And, well, more than that, really. You're going to have to release probably about $100 million worth of players so that you can bring in
Players.
minimum level contract
Yep.
guys to hopefully be somewhat competitive over the next couple of years. It's a tough job, but if you want to build a team from the ground up, great.
I agree. Last thing that we're going to talk about this week, and really the only news that we saw this week, and neither of us like having to have these sort of conversations when it comes to the NFL world. I know when we talked about this sort of situation before, it was weird. And obviously, if you're an NFL fan, you've already heard the news, but Justin Tucker has originally had 6 masseuses claiming that he has sexual allegations against him, and 3 more were added this morning. I am always a person that says I am going to view a person as innocent until they are proven guilty, and I always will back the side of the athlete because I know in this business that there are people that often try to take advantage of athletes. We saw it with Mike Tyson back with his agent. We've seen, for instance, as early or as latest as Matt Ariza when he got hit with false rape allegations and basically destroyed his career for what we thought it was going to be. And then he's luckily been able to make it back to the NFL, and now he's on the Chiefs, and so he's going to be, I think this is his second year with the team, so he's going to be a 2-time Super Bowl champion. Luckily, his career was kind of saved with that. But I'm always looking at this going, when we first saw this stuff with Deshaun Watson, it was like, okay, I want to hear more of this because there are people that can make stuff up with this, and then the amount of numbers that it got to was like, okay, there wasn't going to be 40 masseuses all just coming together randomly and saying we're going to just collectively say that Deshaun Watson did all these things that we're saying he did, even though he didn't. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, like there's some grain of truth there. And when it was initially that it was brought out with the Justin Tucker stuff, I read Justin Tucker's statement about it. And I was like, oh, like I need to know a lot more before I make like a pretty firm decision on it. But then the extra stuff that came out this morning, and the fact that there was also tweets that were brought up from like 2022 where it was Justin Tucker has basically been banned by every massage parlor in Baltimore. Like this is a really, really weird situation. I was like, ooh, these aren't looking good.
Yeah, and that's just it. Once you see reputable businesses also, banning him for these inappropriate actions, that's when you start to go, well, okay, yeah, like I still want it to be proven, but I'm innocent till proven guilty, great, but I'm also not discrediting anything that these victims have said because, as you said, the odds of 6, 9, 25, 40 people all getting together and collectively being vindictive to just go after somebody, that's not as likely. When it's one person, then there are more questions because there's a lot of money involved, and sometimes you do get that, like the Matt Ariza situation. When there's that many people coming out, that's when you know that there is more than just a nugget of truth to these stories.
Yeah. when it came, like, for me, I will always sit back and like, for instance, that initial report, I could sit back and say like, oh, the six of going, maybe Justin Tucker just had a really bad experience and at a certain parlor, and he basically said, you know what, I'm not tipping you guys, like, I hate the service here, like, it was terrible, like, no thank you, and just walks out type situation, and does like a really scumbaggy move and doesn't pay them. And maybe, for instance, those six masseuse all get together and say, oh, like, he's come here multiple times and he's done this and this, and we can all collectively kind of do it that way. But when there's more people being added, and especially those tweets like earlier going like, oh, he's not allowed to, he's banned from basically most of these establishments, it's like, ugh, like, that to me is when I'm like, okay, there's gonna be a lot more conversation here, and I'm gonna start to believe the victims a little bit more, because these are more than just, okay, it's just a small group saying this one thing, and then you start to hear more things. For instance, like 2 years ago when those tweets came out, you're sitting back going like, ah, yeah, I think when we all saw those tweets 2 years ago, we just kind of laughed and went, aw, like, that's silly, like, and we just kind of brushed it past. And now that this has come out, it's like, okay, Justin, there's gotta be a lot of explaining here to do, sir.
Right. Well, and when you factor in the severe drop off in quality of play from him this season as well, you start to wonder if maybe some of these stories have been getting repressed throughout the season, and he was like, just let's finish the season before this comes out, please, and things like that. And so it's there's definitely a lot of questions there. I mean, luckily for him, he likely will still be able to get a job with the Cleveland Browns, because they are, all for that type of behavior.
They'll pay you $230 million guaranteed to actually come there.
Right? Give him a nice 6-year guaranteed contract or something.
Yep.
But yeah, it's definitely suspicious, a lot of the things that have coincided with this, because this was the worst year of his career.
Yeah.
And so you start to wonder, there was something on his mind. He knew that there was something coming down the pipeline, that he was going to be getting in trouble, so he wasn't able to focus fully on football. There was some issues. So, I think we're going to probably see more numbers come out as the weeks go by. And likely an unceremonious end to what was a great football career for what's going to turn out to likely be a pretty shitty dude.
Yeah, like, talking about a Hall of Famer in Justin Tucker. Like,
and I start to think that things like this, we talk about gambling, and it takes you out of talks for Hall of Fame. We talk about steroid use, and it takes you out of talks for the Hall of Fame. I think stuff like this needs to be discussed. Like, it doesn't matter what you do on the field. If you're hurting people off the field, you don't deserve to be enshrined in any Hall of Fame anywhere, unless it's some assault or Hall of Fame.
Well, I agree in the terms of, like, let's say what Deshaun Watson has done and what potentially, because again, I'm not sentencing Justin Tucker here, but like, let's say this is all true. I agree to an extent when it comes to the steroid uses. Like, go back to the baseball, like, that steroid era. I think a lot of the guys, like the Sammy Sosas, like I can't name a bunch of like the Barry Bonds, like those guys. I go, you know what? Put him in the Hall of Fame for baseball, because at the end of the day, what the Hall of Fame is a museum of excellence, or a museum of insane achievements throughout your sport. I'm not saying you glorify the Sammy Sosas or the Barry Bonds because they did steroids during that era. You go, these guys were in the Hall of Fame, but they also did this, and this is a part of the history. Now, for instance, guys like Deshaun Watson and Justin Tucker, again, I'm not sentencing him, but these types of guys, you go, okay, like, yeah, you were doing stuff that was really messing with people outside of the game, as opposed to just trying to affect the game or trying to get an advantage in a, like, for instance, if Justin Tucker was coming out and it was like, oh, he'd been doing steroids the entire time he was playing, I would go, you know what? Like, it's unfortunate that he did steroids this entire time, and that's one of the reasons why. But I still think he should be a Hall of Famer because, like, you looking at this guy going, he still has done something that no one else has done. Yes, it
Yeah.
was enhanced, and it's going to be that asterisk beside him in the Hall of Fame of going, yeah, he did this, but it was also
See,
because of this. Like that to me, that's a difference of opinion that I have. But when it comes
mhm.
to like this type of stuff, like Deshaun Watson, it's like no, like you don't deserve to be in that part of the world. Like that's not something you can just simply gloss over.
Yeah, no, and see, and I agree completely because like what I'm saying is if we're not allowing guys who have done steroids to
In the
make it
Hall
in,
of Fame, you
then
can't
guys who
have
have
those
done
guys.
stuff like this should never get it. Because same thing. It's like doing steroids or gambling. Like, who did you hurt other than yourself
Yes.
in that situation? So that's where, yeah, I think those guys should have a greater chance to get in. That if you're harming other human beings or animals or any other creature, you don't deserve to be enshrined in any sort of manner, way, shape, or form, whatever, even with an asterisk. That's just my opinion. I don't think you should be in any sort of Hall of Fame or anything crediting you for what you were able to do on the field because the things you did off the field completely trump what you were able to do on the field.
Just look at OJ Simpson. OJ Simpson, like I think people forget how insanely good OJ Simpson was at football. Like OJ Simpson had over 2,000 rushing yards in a season of where he played 12 games. Like we talked about Saquon Barkley's year this year as being as insane as it was. Like just imagine if he did that in 12 games. Like these like but then again, no one's talking about OJ Simpson being a Heisman winner or being a Hall of Fame running back because he casually decided to murder a few people and then rob people. And the most famous moment
Mhm.
from OJ Simpson's life was that car chase. Like those are what people are talking about. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of conversation with this, and you and I have already talked so much about that Deshaun Watson
Yeah.
situation, and we have made every joke in the world. Like even before this, we were saying like, why are you going to reputable places and trying to do this with people who have like kinesiology degrees and that type of stuff
Mhm.
when you can just easily go find the sketchy massage parlor that they will offer it to you. Like
Yeah. Yeah, I guarantee you there are massage parlors in Baltimore that offer those specific services that he was looking for. Why are you putting trained individuals who went to school for kinesiology, for massage, for uh, sports medicine, everything? Like,
yeah,
why are you putting them through these situations when there are people that are willing to accommodate this role?
yeah.
It's so silly to me.
It's it's one of those things where guys like us, we just can't necessarily understand some of these motives, but there's just it's just plain
Yeah.
and simple, there's just really really shitty people that are out there. And
Hmm.
I know, for instance, you and I are not going to be covering this like we did with the Deshaun Watson conversation because it felt like every single week there was just new information. It was this, that, and the other thing. And we just got so tired of it. And it's like, yeah, we have to talk about it
Yeah.
because this is NFL news. And this is
Hmm.
something that kind of shocked the NFL world. And there's going to be more conversations about it for sure, but it's one of those things. I think both you and myself are just kind of tired of having this conversation even though it's already started because we've done it before with Deshaun Watson. And you just got to hope, like, man, if you're a professional athlete, like you, like if I was an agent right now, I would be telling all of my clients, stay the
Hmm.
fuck out of massage parlors, for God's sakes.
I mean, beyond that, anybody, like, you should not be behaving in this manner towards other people. Period. I
Exactly.
don't care if you're a famous athlete or if you're just a blue collar worker or anything. That is why we keep talking about this though, because these situations cannot be swept under the rug. This shit needs to be brought to light. These people need to be shamed because it is absolutely inappropriate for you to be harming and damaging another person's life for your selfish gain.
Yeah. But that's all we have time for here today, unless you have anything else that you want to talk
Yeah,
about.
let's close on something a little bit more upbeat and interesting.
Good plan.
Let's talk a little bit about what Bill Belichick said this week and how he believes the Lombardi Trophy should be renamed after Tom Brady. Because there was a lot of talk about that. I discussed it with a few other football fans as well at work, and it's an interesting idea because the Lombardi Trophy was named after Vince Lombardi because of all the great things he did in the game. But he is no longer the GOAT because we talk about Tom Brady and all the things he was able to accomplish. Should this championship trophy be renamed after our current GOAT, Tom Brady?
Yeah, when I first saw this, I initially just chuckled because I looked at it and went, Tom Brady is undeniably the best player in the NFL history that we've seen. I'm just sitting back saying, you know what? It was the best that we've seen in a generation. It might be a little too early, in my opinion, to start throwing out the idea of, instead of it being the Lombardi Trophy, it being the Brady Trophy, because there's currently a guy in the NFL right now that's kind of on pace to break everything that Tom Brady did. And so if, like, let's say for instance next year, instead of it being the Lombardi Trophy, it's now the Tom Brady Trophy, and Mahomes goes to the Super Bowl, this time for a four-peat. It's going to go, well, let's say Mahomes wins 4 years in a row. That means he has 5 Super Bowl rings in 6 Super Bowl appearances. Mahomes is still under 30, guys. Like, I'm pretty sure Mahomes is only 28, 29. And let's just say he plays till he's 38. And let's say he gets 8 Super Bowl victories, all with the Kansas City Chiefs. So when Mahomes decides to retire after breaking all of Tom Brady's records, the Super Bowl wins, the passing yards, the passing touchdown, this, and that, are we going to say 5 years after Mahomes is retired that it actually shouldn't be the Tom Brady, it shouldn't be the Brady championship or the Brady trophy, it should be the Mahomes trophy. I'm just sitting back going, like, I like the idea of naming it after one of the greatest players and one of the best ambassadors of the NFL that we've ever seen, and kind of having that change. But I go, let's maybe hold off for the next like 15 years before we start renaming it, because it would be really, really hard for the NFL at that point to just go, oh, it's the Brady Award or the Tom Brady Trophy.
Yeah.
And we talked about him being the GOAT, but there's kind of this guy that's broken everything. So how do we ultimately talk about like, I like the idea. Let's just hold off a little bit.
Yeah, and see that's just it. You touched on a lot of good points there, and it is just too soon for that. Because even with the Lombardi Trophy, it was not named after Vince Lombardi while he was still alive. You don't name awards like that after anybody until they have passed on, in my opinion, is the way it should be. And so in 15 years or 20 years, when Tom Brady passes, if we're looking at it and going, well, Patrick Mahomes had a great start to his career, but it fizzled out. He never surpassed Tom Brady. At that point, then yes, I really do think that needs to be a serious consideration where we go, okay, posthumously, we are going to name this after him, but I wouldn't want it named after him while he is a broadcaster and an owner and involved in so many other facets of the game already. It really feels like something like that should be a posthumous dedication to a great player. So something like that, I would be 100% on board for. Like in 15, 20 years, when he has passed away, nobody has surpassed what he is able to do on the field at that point. Then we go, okay, yeah, maybe we should consider doing something like this. Because then it affords that opportunity and that time for somebody else great to come up and go, okay, never mind, what he did was great, but we're seeing better already. And so then that conversation resets and we go, okay, well now, if nobody can surpass what this guy did, by the time he has passed on, then we need to consider maybe naming it after him instead. Because that's just it, when everybody brought that to me this week, I was like, well, pump the brakes, because it was not named the Vince Lombardi Trophy
Until
while
after
Vince
Vince
Lombardi
Lombardi
was
was alive.
still coaching.
Yeah.
It wasn't until after he passed on that they went, in honor of this great man who did so many good things, let's name the trophy after him.
Hell.
And that is how I feel about with Tom Brady, is if we reach that point and he is still the greatest to have ever done it, then I think we should definitely consider that. Bill Belichick is correct in that way. It's just, like you said, pump the brakes. It's a bit too soon. You don't name an award after a guy while he is still walking this earth and still so heavily involved in the sport. Because he could do more great things, but he could also do some pretty horrible things in
Yep.
that time. And do you really want an award named after a guy who, in 10 years, walks into some massage parlors and does some sketchy shit? Right? And so that's where I think we got to pump the brakes.
Yeah, I know this conversation has definitely come up because the NBA renamed a bunch of their individual awards and a bunch of their awards to players. Like, for instance, the Larry Bryan Trophy is for the Eastern Conference MVP final, and the Magic Johnson trophy is the Western Conference. The Michael Jordan Award is the MVP. Like, but these weren't all made changes until well after these guys had retired, and it's been like 20 years for Michael Jordan. It's been well over 30, maybe even 40 years at this point for Larry Bird or Magic Johnson, and for the rest of these sort of things. And the Kobe Bryant Trophy, the All-Star MVP game, and like we talked a lot about the All-Star already, but there's already but like it's, let's just simmer down on it, because it's a little too early. But again, in 15-20 years, if Tom Brady has just continued to do nothing but good for the game of football, and Mahomes, let's say Mahomes retires after 5 Super Bowl wins, he goes, you know what? Like, I'm 31 years old. I still have my entire life ahead of me. I've won 5 Super Bowls. Why put my body at risk? I've done everything that I've ever needed to do, and calls it quits.
I mean, that's just it. Like, we could see a three-peat this year, and then we could see Travis Kelce retire, and maybe Andy Reid decides to retire, and all of a sudden we could see Patrick Mahomes never go back to a Super Bowl. That happens all the time. 100% that could happen. And so that's where, like, yes, Mahomes is on pace to outdo what Brady did, but there's no guarantee. And that is why we need to pump the brakes on a discussion like that and let history play out until there is a point. Because I do not have a problem with renaming championship trophies, MVP trophies, after greats that have played more recently than the 1930s. Like, I understand the original, like, they're named after the guys who, spearheaded the game. They were the originals that made the game popular enough that it could go on for 25, 50, 100 years. Like,
yes,
without them, we wouldn't have the game as it is today. But at the same time, without the Michael Jordans, without the Tom Bradys, we wouldn't be having the quality of game that we have today. And so that's where I do support changing the names of these trophies as the greatest of the greats pass on and have done great things with their lives and their careers. I am all for that. But let's wait.
Let's have
so
a
that
little
we
bit
can
more
see
time.
everything come out about those people first.
Exactly. Like, if we renamed it the Brady Trophy when Brady turned 65, sure.
Right?
Yep. But
I mean, even then, for me, it would still be, as long as he's not an owner and a broadcaster. That would be the thing. He needs to be sort of taken away from the sport first. That's where even like Michael Jordan, I feel like it was a little bit too soon. I feel like they only pushed it through because they're like, well, we're renaming the All-Star MVP after Kobe Bryant. It's like, yeah, but Kobe Bryant passed away tragically.
Yeah.
And so that made sense. You can still name it the MVP award after Michael Jordan, but maybe give it another decade. You know,
Yep.
things like that. That's just where I feel about it is we should wait because sometimes after a person has passed on is when we find out about the worst things they did in their life. And so I want to find that stuff out first because I don't want some of these great awards being named after guys and having to go, yeah, but he did kind of do this.
What I'm hearing is you just want Tom Brady dead. Like that's all I'm hearing at this moment. You just want Brady
Well, not
dead.
anymore. He's retired now, so I'm good with that. I don't want him calling games anymore because holy hell, he's hard to listen to. You know, just like he was hard to watch play because he always beat up on my team. You know, you know what that's like. You had Daddy Aaron Rodgers beat up on your Bears for years, so
Yep.
you feel my pain there.
Oh,
I respect Tom Brady, but I fucking hated the guy because
I
he without Tom Brady, the Pittsburgh Steelers could have 7 or 8 championships at this point.
without a doubt. But that's gonna do it here for us today, guys. Thank you all very much for watching during this Pro Bowl week. For Sterling, I'm Brendan saying peace.